Nolan Wells' bombshell report tonight. Does it reveal new witnesses? And because of the new timeline report, is there a timeline shift in what happened the afternoon and evening? Nolan Wells seemingly disappears. His body found washed up at Horn Island. Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us. And that autopsy.
Now I really want to see the other autopsy to see, is there trauma to the body? Is there something that happened?
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it.
I have no doubt that what we're listening to and what she did is credible.
Not only has a timeline been analyzed by the Cajun Navy, the U.S. Cajun Navy, based on all sorts of statistical data, new photos are emerging. Take a look at this photo before we go to the Cajun Navy. Look at this. Check out what you're seeing. Look at all the boats surrounding where Nolan was. Leave up the photo out to Caitlin Becker, senior national correspondent, New York Post, star of New York Postcast, their new podcast. Caitlin, what are we seeing?
Well, what we're seeing here comes from this new report from the United Cajun Navy, and you're seeing several boats strung together. This is one of the first images that we've seen of this certain configuration of boats there. They're all identified, one of which was the boat that Nolan came out there on. There's several others kind of anchored with it and tied up, which begs the question of, where was Nolan when this photo was taken? Because it's unclear if he's actually in it. What time was this photo actually taken? So what you're seeing here is, as you said, a potential pool of witnesses.
Hey, Caitlin, look at this. There's boat number 1. There's boat X. There's boat number 2. There's boat number 3. And there's a boat from which the photo is taken. Now, look in the water. There much has been made. Nolan Wells was drinking. Okay, well, apparently everybody was. They all have containers, open containers in the water. Okay, as far as I know, that's not a felony. Boat number 1, full of people. Boat X, full of people. Boat number 2, full of people. Boat number 3, full of people. People on the boat from which the photo was taken. Some of these boats tied together. You know what that means in my world, Caitlin Becker, joining us from the New York Post? Let me see, Caitlin, please. That means witnesses. See, when I look at that, I see witnesses. Do you see all those people?
And a lot of them.
Who were they? Have they been spoken to? Have they been polygraphed? What can they tell me?
That is the question, right? We don't know from an investigative standpoint who has been spoken to, exactly who is in this photo, and what they have or haven't told law enforcement, because there hasn't been really any transparency there. But from what our reporting has showed, there have been dozens of people who have spoken to law enforcement as witnesses. But Nancy, we don't know if it's any of these people that you're seeing in this little cove area right here. And the timing, I think, is really important, because these images are taken right around, I think the timeline's about 3:30-ish, 4:30-ish, when the boat that Nolan came out there on leaves and starts taking on water. That's one of the pegs for the timeline. When these photos were actually taken, that is a peg for a timeline. But what we don't know is where Nolan is. There he is. You can see that image right there. But we don't know is where Nolan was when that first image that we saw with all of those boats kind of tied together, when that was taken.
You are seeing a photo obtained by our friends at the United.
Nancy Grace update. Nolan Wells' bombshell report reveals new witnesses and timeline changes. That is not just a headline. That is a case. That just cracked open. A young man goes to Horn Island, July 4th, surrounded by friends, surrounded by boats, surrounded by people having a good time. And somehow, nobody saw what happened, or that's what we were told. Nolan Wells is dead. His body found washed up on that same island. The autopsy is complete, and they are not showing it to us. But a new report just dropped, built by civilians, photo by photo, boat by boat, and it is changing what we thought we knew. The friends say one thing, the witnesses say another, And somewhere between those two stories is what actually happened. Now here is where we start. Not with the background, not with who Nolan was. We start with the contradiction, because that is where this case lives, from the very beginning. Friends of Nolan Wells said they did not know the girl. Her name is Katie. She was the last known person to speak with Nolan before he disappeared. And the story from his friends was simple. She was just some girl. Nolan met her that day. Nobody knew her. Nobody had ever seen her before. Okay, hold that, because here is what we also know. During the search for Nolan, when friends were trying to find him, trying to figure out where he went, at least one person in that group was texting Katie. Think about that for a second. You do not text a stranger. You do not have the number of someone you have never met. You do not reach out directly to a person nobody knew. That is not how it works. And yet there it is. A text chain between someone in Nolan's circle and the girl nobody claimed to know. One friend went on Officer Tatum's podcast and said this: "He was with that girl last time I knew." But those same friends called her some girl, a stranger, someone Nolan just started talking to. Both of those things cannot be true. That is not a memory gap. That is a choice. Now let me give you Nolan Wells, just enough to understand what we are looking at. Nolan Wells was a young man out on July 4th at Horn Island, a popular recreational boating destination. Off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, he came out on a boat called the Triton with a group of friends. It was a holiday. It was a crowd, multiple boats, dozens of people, all anchored in the same area. That is the scene. That is the location. Now let's talk about what happened there, because the timeline is everything in this case. Sometime in the afternoon, Nolan arrives at Horn Island on the Triton. The party is already going. Boats clustered together, people in the water, a full holiday scene. Between roughly 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. Photos show multiple boats, anchored side by side. Nolan is among the crowd, and at some point during this window, he begins talking to Katie. Around 4:30 p.m., the Triton develops a problem. The bilge pump. The boat is taking on water. It needs to leave. Now, friends say they turn to Nolan. "Get on the boat. Come with us. Let's go." He said no. He told them he was going to stay. Finish talking to Katie. He would find another way back. So the Triton left, without him. And when it left, his phone went with it. His phone, his only way to call for help, his only connection to the mainland, gone. On a boat heading back without him. Now here is where the Cajun Navy report adds something significant. Page 14 of their timeline document contains a photo submitted by a member of the public, taken at approximately 4:50 p.m. Central Time. In that photo, there is a young man on the beach, slender build, blue swim trunks, partially visible, matching Nolan's description. The Cajun Navy was clear. They could not confirm this is Nolan. But if it is, that means he was still alive, still on that island, at 4:50 p.m., after the Triton had already gone, after his phone was already gone, after his ride home had already left him behind. And then, 7:30 p.m., a witness states, no one in sight, not on the shore, not in the water, not anywhere. Between 4:50 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., there is a window, a 2-hour and 40-minute window that nobody has publicly filled. Not law enforcement, not the friends, not Katie, nobody. Now let me bring in something that forensic pathologist Joe Scott Morgan raised, because it matters here. Not every body floats immediately. Water temperature plays a role. Depth plays a role. And Horn Island has what experts describe as an aggressive slope. What that means is this. You can be standing in shallow water, take just a few steps, and suddenly you are in water, over your head, add a current, add a riptide, add the fact that there were boats anchored all around that area, and a body can be held beneath the surface without anyone knowing. This is not speculation. This is forensic science, applied to a known geography. A few steps in the wrong direction at Horn Island, and the water takes over. The question is whether those steps were taken alone. Now let's talk about the report. That is giving us more to work with than anything authorities have released publicly. The United Cajun Navy is a civilian volunteer organization. They are not investigators. They do not claim to be. What they did was straightforward. They asked the public, if you were at Horn Island on July 4th, send us your photos, send us your videos, send us anything you have. And the public responded. What came back was a collection of photos and videos taken that day, on that water, by real people who were there. The Cajun Navy compiled it all, organized it, cross-referenced it with satellite imagery, and produced a timeline document that anyone can read. Page 12 of that report shows a photo that stops you cold. 3 boats, maybe more, all anchored side by side, tied together in a cluster, labeled in the report, Boat 1, Boat 2, Boat 3, Boat X, every single boat, full of people. Now here is the investigative point, that Nancy Grace drove home, hard. Every boat on the water is required to be registered. Every registration has an owner. Every owner can tell us who was on that boat on July 4th. Boat registration numbers are public record. If law enforcement ran every visible registration number from every photo taken that day, they have a witness list. The question is whether that list has been fully worked, because those boats were full of people with real memories of what they saw that day, and we do not know who has been spoken to, who has not, what was said, or what was left out. That is the gap, right there. We are going to keep tracking every update on this case, every report, every document, every development. If you want to be here when the next piece drops, subscribe to Detective Crime Hour right now, because we are not going to cover this once and move on. We are going to stay on it until there are real answers. And this story is not finished, not even close. Now let's talk about the autopsy. It is done. It exists. A forensic pathologist has examined Nolan Wells, written a report, documented findings, and that report is sealed. No cause of death. Released publicly. No manner of death. Confirmed. No findings shared. Nothing. Toxicology is still pending, which means we are also waiting on what was or was not in Nolan's system that day. Now here is what a forensic pathologist would typically be looking for. In a case like this, is there water in the lungs, consistent with drowning? Is there trauma to the body? That does not fit an accidental fall. Is the time of death window consistent with the known timeline, or does it contradict it? Those are the questions that autopsy can answer. And right now, we cannot see any of those answers. When the cause of death is clear and accidental, they tell you. When they go quiet, that silence has a reason. And then there is this. Reports indicate a grand jury is convening. Grand juries do not convene for accidents. That is not an opinion. That is how the legal system works. A grand jury is convened when prosecutors believe there may be a crime and they are building a case to present evidence and determine whether charges are warranted. That is what is reportedly happening right now. Behind closed doors. A grand jury means someone, somewhere, believes there is a case to be made. The question is against whom. So let's put it all together. Here is what we have. Friends who said they did not know Katie, but were texting her. A timeline with a gap, 2 hours and 40 minutes wide, that nobody has explained. An autopsy, that is complete and sealed. A grand jury, that is reportedly convening and not talking. And a report, compiled by civilians, with photos, coordinates, a mapped timeline, and a cluster of boats, full of potential witnesses. that nobody has publicly accounted for. If you were at Horn Island on July 4th, if you have photos, videos, or anything at all. The number for law enforcement is 228-769-3063. Again, 228-769-3063. One photo, one memory, one detail you think doesn't matter. Could be exactly what this investigation needs. Because right now, the most organized public record of evidence in this entire case was built by volunteers, not by the agencies with subpoena power. And that tells you something. About how much? We still do not know. The next update on this case could be the one that changes everything. Subscribe to Detective Crime Hour and make sure you are here when it does.